You've got two wrestlers who should be capable of having a great match. Their skills are good, their psychology is good, their stamina is good, the crowd is hot, everything looks right. So you book the match and then you change just one thing. You don't change the wrestlers, you don't change the match type, you don't change the finish, you change the match aim. And suddenly you're asking those wrestlers to approach the match in a completely different way. So what exactly are match aims? Why are there so many of them? When should you use them? When should you avoid them? And why can the same match aim be fantastic in one situation and a terrible choice in another? Today we're going to find out. This is episode 6 of the TEW9 official Handbook Explained series. And we're talking about match aims. In the previous episode, we looked at psychology and we learned that psychology isn't simply a number that tells us whether a wrestler is good. It's about their ability to structure, pace, and execute a match. But that gives us another question. If psychology helps determine how well a wrestler can construct a match, what exactly are we asking them to construct? And that's where match aims come in. The official TEW9 player handbook tells us something very important here. Unlike some previous games in the series, TEW9 doesn't have a separate match style setting. Instead, the information is contained within the match aims you give the match through the road agent notes. So when you choose a match aim, you're not simply saying, make this match good. You're telling the game, this is what I want this match to accomplish. And that is the most important thing to understand about match aims. They're instructions. Now, there are 19 match aims we're going to look at today, and I don't want to read 19 definitions at you. Instead, we're going to group them by what you're actually trying to achieve. We'll look at the neutral and storyline aims, then the crowd management aims, then the specialist wrestling aims, then the alternative and reset aims, and finally the big match aims. But we're also going to talk about when to use them, because knowing what an aim does is only half the battle. The other half is knowing when the game actually wants you to use it. But before we get into the individual aims, we need to understand the crowd, because match aims and crowd management are closely connected. The official TEW9 handbook explains that crowd management means booking your show to play with the crowd's emotions and expectations. And it says this is primarily done through the aims of your matches and how those aims are ordered. So the match aim isn't necessarily just affecting the match you're booking, it can affect the crowd, which can then affect the segments that come afterwards. And this is where TEW gets really interesting. The crowd can move through different levels of excitement. Cold, normal, hot, very hot, and in TEW9 there is also white hot crowds there. Now you might naturally think, right, so I just need to make the crowd as hot as possible. But that's not quite right, because some match aims actually work better at particular crowd temperatures, and some aims can be badly placed when the crowd is already very hot. The objective isn't simply make the crowd hotter, it's get the crowd to the right temperature for the match I'm about to book. That is a much better way of thinking about crowd management. There is a really useful piece of community research that I want to talk about here. A Reddit user called IceHandGino put together a detailed guide testing match aims and crowd management. Now, that testing was originally done for TEW 2020, so I'm not going to pretend that a Reddit test from an older game is automatically an official TEW9 mechanic. In fact, somebody later asked the author whether the guide was still valid for TEW9, and they openly said that they couldn't confirm it. That's exactly why I tested these mechanics myself in TEW9. I've already covered that testing in my previous video, Crowd Management and Match Aim Guide, so if you want to see these mechanics actually being tested in TEW9, I'll leave that linked in the description. But for this episode, we're going to use those results alongside the handbook and explain what they mean for your booking. Let's start with the most important match aim of all, regular. Regular is your neutral bread and butter match aim. You're not asking the wrestlers to specialise, you're not asking them to deliberately slow down the crowd, you're not asking them to produce some extraordinary spectacle. You're basically saying, have a normal wrestling match. And that's why regular is so useful. The community testing found that regular carries no special bonus or penalty of its own. It's the neutral option, and a good regular match can also raise the crowd from normal to hot, and from hot to very hot. That's important, because regular isn't just the safe button, it's also one of those tools you can use to naturally build your audience. If you're a new player and you're wondering what you should use when you don't know what else to choose, regular is usually a great place to start. But don't confuse safe with best. Regular isn't automatically the highest rated option, it's simply the neutral option, and sometimes neutral is exactly what you need. Next, storytelling. Storytelling is about putting the story at the centre of the match. The workers are deliberately holding back rather than simply going all out, and that means it uses less stamina than a normal match. So when would you use it? Well, the obvious answer is when your product requires storytelling matches. But it can also be useful when the story you're trying to tell is more important than maximizing the physical intensity of the match. It can also help if you're worried about psychology penalties from workers being asked to perform above what their psychology can support. So don't look at storytelling and think, this is a worse version of regular. It's doing something different. You're telling the game, the story is the priority here. And sometimes that's exactly what you want. Now we're getting into the crowd management aims. First, work the crowd. This one is interesting because the name can be misleading. You might think, work the crowd means make the crowd hotter. But the community testing found that it doesn't simply raise the crowd temperature. Instead, it can be a particularly useful choice when the crowd isn't normal. That's because you can take advantage of the strong start situation without simply pushing the crowd through the usual regular match progression. So if you're opening your show with a match, or you're deliberately reset your audience to normal, work the crowd can have a very useful place. It's not make the crowd hotter, it's more work with the audience current mood. And that's a really important distinction. Next, lift the crowd. This is much more straightforward. You're trying to lift the crowd that has gone cold. That is something you hopefully won't need to do very often. The community testing found that lift the crowd is basically an emergency tool for a cold crowd. Remember, your show doesn't normally start cold, it starts at normal. Cold is what happens when something goes badly wrong. So if you're using lift the crowd, something has probably gone wrong somewhere. But that's why the option exists. If you've lost the crowd, you need a way of getting them back, and lift the crowd is that tool. Then we have the complete opposite, calm the crowd. And that is one of the most useful match aims to understand, because the instinctive reaction is, why would I ever want to calm my crowd? Well, sometimes you absolutely do. If you've just had a huge match, the crowd is extremely hot, and the next match you want to book isn't suited to a very hot crowd, you have a problem. That's where calm the crowd comes in. The community testing found that calm the crowd doesn't simply drop the crowd one level, it resets the crowd to normal. And I've tested this myself in TEW9. It works. I've already shown that testing in my previous crowd management and match aim guide if you want to see it happening in the game. The downside is that the workers hold back, so you sacrifice some potential match rating, but you're doing that for a reason. You're resetting the audience, and that's why calm the crowd shouldn't be thought of as the bad match aim. It's a tool. You're deliberately sacrificing some performance now so that you can set up what comes next. Booking a wrestling show, from experience, I've had experience in real life working around wrestling shows. You try to take the audience on a ride up and down throughout the 2 hours or 1 hour show, telling stories, putting on great performances, having a mix of all kinds of entertainment on there. And this brings us to eye candy. Eye candy is designed around attractiveness and sex appeal. The Handbook identifies sex appeal as being the primarily used in eye candy matches as the basis for worker performance. So this is obviously an aim where the appropriate worker matter. But here's the real interesting part. Eye candy is also one of them match aims that can reset the crowd to normal. I've tested this myself in TEW9, and again, you can see that test in my previous crowd management and match aim guide. So, eye candy can serve two purposes. You might generally want an eye candy match, or you might deliberately use it as part of your crowd management strategy. The community testing also found that eye candy has a very short time limit, so it's not something you should be treating like a 20-minute main event. It's a specialized tool, and if your product penalizes eye candy, you need to take that into account as well. So ask yourself, am I using eye candy because it fits my show or because I need the crowd reset? Either can be a valid reason. Next, comedy. Comedy is another match aim that changes the entire purpose of the match. You're deliberately asking the match to entertain the audience through comedy rather than trying to maximize conventional wrestling performance. And again, comedy can reset the crowd to normal. That's been reported in the community testing, and I've independently tested it in TEW9. So this gives you another crowd management tool. You can use comedy because you generally want a comedy match, or you can use it because you need to reset the audience. But you need to remember that the match still needs the right workers and the right product. A comedy match in a product that doesn't want comedy isn't suddenly a good idea because you need a crowd reset. So, fit the tool to the product. Now we're moving into specialized wrestling aims. First, Wild Brawl. This is designed for a chaotic physical brawl, and this is where worker skills become particularly important. The community testing found that Wild Brawl benefits with workers with the strongest score between brawling and pure ratio. So if you've got a worker who is excellent at brawling, this can be a very good way of showcasing that strength. But there are trade-offs. Wild Brawl has a short time limit. The community testing found that specialist aims shouldn't be taken beyond 15 minutes. They also consume a lot of stamina. And because they can produce a big boost in the ring performance, they can also expose psychology weaknesses if the workers aren't capable of supporting the resulting match quality. So Wild Brawl can be fantastic, but only when the workers can actually deliver it. Next, Hardcore. Hardcore is designed around hardcore wrestling. The key stat is hardcore. Simple enough. But again, the aim comes with trade-offs. Like Wild Brawl, Hardcore has a short time limit and is demanding on stamina. So you don't want to take a couple of workers with mediocre stamina, book them in a long hardcore match, and then wonder why the match falls apart. But if you've got workers with excellent hardcore skills and your product supports that type of match, it can be a great specialistic option. And this is important principle. A specialist aim is there to specialize. Use it when you've got something worth showcasing. Then Deathmatch. Deathmatch takes the hardcore concept in an even more extreme environment. The key performance skill is again hardcore, but the deathmatch worker attribute gives an additional benefit, and there is also an increased injury risk. So you're making a trade. You're accepting additional danger in exchange for the benefits of a deathmatch. Again, the community testing places this in the same family as Wild Brawl, Hardcore, and High Spots. Shorter matches, higher stamina demands, and a significant performance boost when the workers have the appropriate skill. So don't book a deathmatch simply because that sounds exciting. Book it because the match itself is supposed to be a deathmatch and because the workers and product can support it. Next, High Spots. This is your aerial specialist aim. And the two key skills identified in the community testing are aerial and flashiness. So if you've got two young high flyers with excellent aerial and flashiness, this is where you can really showcase what makes them special. But again, there's a cost. High Spots consume a lot of stamina. They have the same short time considerations as other specialist aims. And if your workers don't have the skills, you don't get the benefit. So don't choose High Spots because somebody has a high flyer gimmick. Look at their numbers. That's a very TEW way of thinking. The question isn't, does the wrestler look like a high flyer? The question is, can the wrestler actually perform the High Spots aim? And then we have Technical Masterclass. This is the other major specialist wrestling aim, but it works differently from Wild Brawl, Hardcore, Deathmatch, and High Spots. The community testing found that Technical Masterclass doesn't work properly in front of a very hot crowd. It's much better suited to a normal or a hot audience. That makes it an excellent example of why crowd management matters. You might have two fantastic technicians, but if your crowd is already very hot, you need to think about when you're going to use them. And that brings us right back to the reset tools. Sometimes you need to bring the crowd back to normal before you can use the match aim you actually want. Now we've got something very different. Mayhem. Mayhem is about chaos. The community testing describes it as a match that the focus moves away from pure wrestling performance and towards shenanigans and chaos. And that gives it a very interesting niche, because Mayhem can actually help hide the weaknesses of lower level workers. If you've got weaker wrestlers who aren't capable of putting on a traditional high quality match, Mayhem can give you another way of presenting them. But it also caps the performance of your top wrestlers. So don't put your best wrestlers into Mayhem and expect it to magically create their best possible match. It's designed to do something different. Mayhem also has a 20-minute time limit, so I'd think of this as a specialist undercard tool, unless your product specifically requires it. Now we get to the high intensity aims. First, Car Crash. The name tells you a lot. This is supposed to feel chaotic and destructive. The community testing found that Car Crash benefits from strong psychology and can provide a significant boost to performance, but it also consumes more stamina than regular, and it also has a small increase in injury risk. It also has a 20-minute time limit, so again, you're making a trade. You're saying, I want the increased intensity in performance, but you're accepting the additional demands and risks that come with it. Car Crash is therefore a great example of why you shouldn't just choose an aim because it's exciting. You need the workers, the crowd, the product, and the match purpose to justify it. Next, Steal the Show. And this is one of the more interesting aims in the game, and it's one of my favourites, because the name tells you exactly what you're trying to do. You're asking the match to stand out, to steal the show. The community testing found that Steal the Show can provide a strong performance boost across the workers, but it also uses more stamina than regular. It has a 20-minute time limit, and there's a greater risk of inconsistency, so you have a very interesting choice. Regular is safer, Steal the Show is asking for more, and that's why I wouldn't tell you always use Steal the Show for your main event. You'll see plenty of community debate about that. Some players swear by it, others say they get better and more consistent results from regular, and that's actually useful because it demonstrates that the community experience isn't always unanimous. If your worker has the stamina and consistency to handle it, Steal the Show can be excellent. It isn't the magic higher rated button. Then we have Spectacle, and this one can be very tempting because, well, it's called Spectacle. Surely that's what you want with your big match. But the community testing found that Spectacle is very situational. It requires a hot crowd and can be penalised in front of a very hot crowd or white hot crowd. It also has a minimum time requirement, and it benefits from strong psychology. So if you have a very hot crowd and you suddenly decide this is the perfect time for a spectacle, you may actually be putting the match in the wrong environment. And this is why crowd management matters. Very hot isn't automatically better than hot. If the aim specifically wants hot, then hot may be the better environment. That sounds backward, but that's TEW. And then Epic. This is probably the match aim that sounds the most obviously suited to a major main event. Epic. You've got your biggest stars, your biggest storyline, the crowd is going crazy, so you choose Epic. But again, the game doesn't simply reward you for choosing the biggest sounding option. The community testing found that Epic requires a hot crowd and can be penalised if you try to run it in front of very hot or white hot. It also has a minimum time required and benefit from strong psychology, and the official handbook gives us another warning. If you put on multiple Epic matches in a row, you can burn the crowd out. So Epic isn't use this every time you have a big match, it's use this when the situation calls for an epic match. And that distinction is huge. And finally, once in a lifetime. The name tells us the philosophy here. This is supposed to be something exceptional, something that feels genuinely special. And that means it shouldn't be your default big match button, or if every pay-per-view has the once in a lifetime matches, then nothing is once in a lifetime. The aim is designed for the moments where you generally want the match to feel extraordinary. So if you ask yourself, is this actually the moment I'm trying to make unforgettable? If the answer is yes, then this could be the appropriate tool. But if the answer is, I've got two big stars wrestling, so this sounds like the biggest option, I'd stop and think about it. But then again, it does mention that wrestlers should be quite far in the Hall of Fame of the game, so I would check that before booking it. So when should you use them? Now that we've got all 19, we can start putting the pieces together. Let's simplify the crowd management side. Your show begins as normal. A good regular match can move you from normal to hot, and then from hot to very hot. A good angle can also help build the crowd. Work the crowd has a particular niche around normal. Lift the crowd is essentially your tool for recovering a cold crowd. Calm the crowd resets the crowd to normal, and so do comedy and eye candy. And I've tested those reset mechanics myself in TEW9. If you want to see the actual test, check out my previous crowd management and match aim guide towards the end. Now, why would you deliberately reset a very hot crowd? Because some match aims don't want very hot. Technical Masterclass is one example. Spectacle and Epic are other examples from community testing. So sometimes you don't want to stay at maximum heat. You want to reset the crowd so you can use the match aim you actually want, and that's the key. Match aim ordering. And this is why the order matters. The official handbook specifically warns that opening the show with a crowd calming match is a poor placement. Why? Because the audience arrives with natural enthusiasm, and you're immediately telling them to calm down. The handbook also warns that repeatedly using major aims, such as 3 epic matches in a row, will burn the crowd out. And the community testing found that additional penalties for certain combinations of intense or repeated match aims. For example, running 2 crazy match types consistently can create a penalty, and some aims don't like being repeated back to back. So don't think of each match as an isolated event. Think about the entire card. The crowd is moving through your show, you're building them, you're cooling them, you're building them again, and eventually you're trying to reach your biggest moments at exactly the right time. A simple example. Let's say you're booking a 6-match show. You don't necessarily want 6 matches that are trying to reach maximum intensity. You might start with an angle, then use a regular or work the crowd match, depending on if you put the angle first. Regular would be best if you've got the angle first. Work the match is if you put the match first, because remember, that's the normal state of the crowd, and that's when work the crowd works best. Build towards hot. Then you can use the benefits from the crowd being hot, perhaps a specialist match, then another angle, then perhaps a crowd reset match if you need one. Bring the crowd back to normal. Then start building again. And by the time you reach your biggest match, you've managed the audience instead of exhausting them. That's the difference between booking matches and booking a show. And this brings us straight back to episode 5, psychology. And this brings us back to episode 5. Psychology helps wrestlers structure and execute matches. Match aims tell the game what kind of match you're asking them to construct. So you can think of it like this. Psychology asks, can you construct this? The match aim asks, what are we constructing? And that's why the two systems work together. You can choose the perfect match aim, but if your wrestlers don't have the psychology to support the resulting performance, you can get a psychology penalty. And that is particularly important with ambitious aims. The community testing found that some specialist aims can produce large performance boosts, but that can actually make psychology penalties worse if the workers aren't capable of supporting that level of performance. So a big bonus isn't automatically a big win. Sometimes the bonus creates a bigger problem. Again, TEW is asking you to think. And the same applies to match length. Don't think epic means 30 minutes. Don't think main event means longest match. And don't think technical masterclass needs 15 minutes because an old guy told me. TEW9 reduced the minimum technical masterclass time to 10 minutes. Match length needs to be considered alongside the match aim, the workers, their psychology, their stamina, and your product. The handbook also makes clear that longer matches put greater demands on psychology. So don't book the match aim you wish your wrestlers could have. Book the match they can actually deliver. Then there's your road agent. The road agent isn't simply there to tell you who wins. Their psychology and experience are major parts of their ability to put matches together. Respect can also contribute. And the road agent can warn you if you've made an obvious mistake. So if you're booking a demanding match aim and your road agent tells you the match is going to be a problem, don't ignore them. There's another part of the system. You're not simply choosing an aim, you're asking the entire match structure to deliver it. Now, I want to make something very clear. The official TEW9 handbook confirms the big picture. It tells us that TEW9 doesn't have separate match style setting. It tells us that match aims are the way the information is communicated. And if it tells us that crowd management is primarily controlled by the aims of your matches and the order in which you use them, it even gives us examples of poor placement, like opening the crowd calming match, or burning the audience out by using multiple epic matches in succession. Those are the official TEW9 mechanics. Then we get the community testing. The Reddit guide we talked about goes much deeper into individual match aims and crowd temperatures, but that testing was originally done in TEW 2020. The authors themselves couldn't confirm that the results carry over to TEW9. That's why I tested them myself. And I've already covered those tests in previous videos, so if you're watching this and thinking, does that actually happen in TEW9? Go and watch that video. You can see the test for yourself, and that's how I want to approach this series. Not somebody on Reddit said it, therefore it's fact, but here's what the handbook says, here's what players have tested, and here's what I've personally tested in TEW9. Then you can decide how much confidence you want to put in each piece of information. And I think the biggest mistake people make with match aims is trying to find the best one. There isn't necessarily a universally best match aim. The right match aim depends on your workers, their skills, their psychology, their stamina, your product, and the crowd. The position on the card, the desired match length, and the story you're trying to tell. So instead of asking, what is the best match aim, ask, what does this match need to accomplish? If you simply need a normal wrestling match, regular. If the story is the priority, storytelling. If you need to work a normal crowd, work the crowd. If the crowd has gone cold, lift the crowd. If you need to reset, calm the crowd, or comedy, or eye candy. If you have excellent brawlers, wild brawl. If you have hardcore specialists and your product allows it, hardcore. Same with deathmatch. If you've got a deathmatch specialist, book a deathmatch. If you've got high flyers, high spots. If you've got technicians, technical masterclass. If you need chaos, mayhem. If you want destruction, use car crash. If you're asking for a match to try and steal the show, use steal the show. If you're building a major attraction, use spectacle. If you're creating a huge wrestler match, use epic. And if you're generally trying to create something extraordinary, once in a lifetime. But don't just choose the aim. Choose the environment, the crowd temperature, choose the wrestlers, choose the length, choose the position, and choose the purpose. That's booking. So, the next time you open the booking screen, don't look at match aims as 19 buttons. Think of them as a toolbox. Regular gives you your neutral match. Storytelling puts the story first. Work the crowd works the audience. Lift the crowd can recover a cold crowd. Calm the crowd resets it. Wild brawl gives you the brawl. Hardcore gives you the hardcore wrestling. Deathmatch takes it to the extreme. High spot showcase aerial ability. Technical masterclass showcases technical wrestling. Eye candy changes the focus to attractiveness and can also reset the crowd. Comedy provides a different kind of entertainment and can reset the crowd. Mayhem gives you chaos. Car crash gives you destruction. Steal the show asks the match to stand out. Spectacle creates a major attraction. Epic creates a huge match. And once in a lifetime, well, that's for when you really mean it. But none of those buttons is automatically the best. The best match aim is the one that fits the situation. And once you understand that, you're no longer just asking, which button should I press? You're asking, what do I need the match to accomplish? And that is when you're starting to think like a TEW booker. Because TEW9 isn't simply asking, who is wrestling? It's asking, what are you trying to achieve with them? And once you understand match aims, you're not just booking individual matches anymore, you're booking the flow of the entire show. Before we finish, if you're enjoying the TEW9 official handbook explains and you're finding it useful, I'd really appreciate your support. A quick like really helps the channel, and if you haven't already, consider subscribing so you don't miss any future episodes. If you want to watch the next episode before everyone else, Patreon members get early access to every new video before it's released publicly here on YouTube. And by becoming a Patreon member, you're also directly supporting GS Gaming. And that allows me to spend more time researching the official handbook, testing game mechanics, and creating even more in-depth TEW guides like this one. If you'd like to support the channel, there's a link in the description below. Now, let's get back to TEW, because we've just learned how to tell TEW what kind of match we want. But there's still a big problem. What happens if the workers simply aren't good enough at the fundamentals to pull it off? Because you can have the perfect match in, the perfect crowd, the perfect psychology, and still have a problem. If the wrestlers can't execute the basics, the whole thing can fall apart. So next time, we're going back to fundamentals of basics and selling. So with that, I'll catch you down the road.